start by saying that I sort of feel like the land intermission between these really entertaining papers, because the type of Baroque I'm going to be presenting is coming from an Italian position, which is certainly not in the realm of the Latin American hyper-Baroque or neo-Baroque definition. Much more puritanical, as Francesco Clemente says, about Boetti's type of Baroque and sublime in his work. The other thing is I'm not quite sure what I'm doing here. In part because Luis asked me if I wanted to join this project, and I said, well, I do it's European stuff, but he seems to have been interested in the fact that I did do a paper on Borromini and Trinitarians and Johannes Kepler, and that I've been on a defense on Mexican wrestling for one of his students, so he asked me to join along and thought I'd be able to contribute something rather interesting, and because my area is actually more in sort of the intersections between science and art in the first half of the 20th century. But my interest in this was sort of fueled by the fact that a number of times that the Baroque comes up as a reference in terms of 20th century art, everything from Theo van Doesburg style, seeing the Baroque as sort of a necessary element within a sort of Hegelian dialectic with the classical and justifying the style of art, to check Cubism, which makes reference to the Baroque, to the Polish abstract artists Katarzyna Kobro and Władysław Strzemiński, who use the Baroque as sort of model of critique of a number of contemporary artists as well. So the Baroque has popped up in a number of places during my work, and I was sort of inquiring as to, what the heck is it doing there? Why is the Baroque there? And I sort of undertook the type of outline that you presented, looking at people like Wolflin and how they sort of phrase the Baroque, leading up all to in terms of the contemporary era. And I hit on the Arte Povera in part through a gradual movement into sort of post-Second World art, post-Second World War art, specifically in terms of some of the work I did on Francis Bacon's painting, which has a number of connection points to the Baroque. And it was an artist that the Arte Povera artists were quite fond of, even though painting wasn't necessarily going to be their area of making works. And I want to sort of start with a quote, oddly enough, by an American artist, but one that really sums up very nicely what Povera we're sort of looking at in terms of examining the Baroque. Because I don't think they are necessarily neo-Baroque per se, but they certainly saw a number of important commonalities in terms of themes that they were going to be embracing. Now, I haven't finished and decided on this yet, and this is really sort of embryonic material that I'm presenting, because I've only done sort of what I call the forward research, which is in a way to contextualize Arte Povera in terms of what work was being done on the Baroque at that moment in time. Like, what exposure to the Baroque did they have in terms of ideas, and then the backward research is in terms of looking at contemporary critical theory on the Baroque and examining that in the context of the Povera group. So in other words, you're getting more of the sort of contextual sense of where Povera was coming rather than necessarily the backward sort of critical component of it. But I mean, I'm obviously hinting at it as we move along. The artist in question in the quote really illustrates very nicely the sort of perception of the Baroque at this moment in time. It's an American sculptor, Robert Morris, and his essay from 1978, where he's talking about a group of American artists, people like Richard Serra and Robert Smithson, who, not surprisingly, some of them actually worked in Italy. Serra was quite fond of Italy and did a number of works there. And when he's talking about going against definition in the 60s, he's talking about specifically minimalist art, which he was a participant, but a very ironic sort of participant of minimalism. And he points out the concerns of the new work in question, the coexistence of the work in viewer space, multiple views, the beginnings of an attack on the structure provided by the Gestalt, the uses of distances and continuous deep spaces, the explorations of new relations to nature, the importance of time, the assumptions of subjective aspects of perception, also describe the concerns of the Baroque. This is where it's a little dry, but nonetheless quite interesting. It would seem that much of the work most cognate to my discussion, work which pushes hardest against the 60s definitions, which is the minimalist, has to some extent moved into a Baroque sensibility and experience without, for the most part, the accompanying Baroque imagery. And this is a key thing. We will not see much in terms of direct Baroque borrowings. And as well, I should point out, Morris is the first to encourage Leo Castelli to exhibit the Italian artists associated with Arte Povera, because he certainly saw a shared sensibility with them. And in fact, Castelli had an important exhibition that included a number of Povera artists in 1968 in an exhibition called The Nine. Now, obviously with the Italians, the context of fascism is hugely important, and in the context of the Baroque, it is massive. Plus, it's always great to put images of Mussolini up. And I'm still extremely fond of the Great Dictator because that's a brilliant, characterization of Mussolini in that movie. In fact, almost overshadowed Chaplin's version of Hitler in it. And the legacy, and the interesting thing with the fascists was Mussolini really didn't care that much for the arts in terms of painting sculpture. I mean, he really had a relative distaste for artists. I mean, he was close friends with Marinetti, the poet associated with Futurism, but there was a falling out because Marinetti just couldn't support Mussolini's embrace of the Catholic Church as a necessary sort of political device. Which, to the detriment of a number of artists like Mario Cironi, who desperately wanted to be the neoclassical representative of fascism, and Mussolini just couldn't care less for Cironi's work. I mean, it was up to his mistress, essentially, to encourage the development of the sort of more portable arts, in a sense. But Mussolini, in part to his credit, I mean, focused real attention on architecture and on the popular arts in terms of the radio broadcasts as well as cinema. I mean, that's where he really put his efforts in terms of propagandizing the fascist initiative, which arguably is from the period of 1922, the famous March on Rome, to 1943, when they finally do get rid of Mussolini. Important in terms of my context is that the fascists, and Mussolini in particular, hated the Baroque. The Baroque was simply just a style that was viewed as very much decadent. And this may have been prejudiced to a certain extent by Croce, proposing in 1925 in a famous lecture in Zurich that maybe we should revive the term Baroque to describe artistic decadence in a sense. Although he modified that slightly, but nonetheless, there was this prejudice towards Baroque. And it echoed prejudice just generally after the First World War, because you have the famous Retour à l'ordre in Europe after the First World War, which saw Cubism sort of banished for a short time, Futurism being banished for a short time, and a revival of a type of neoclassicism, which Mussolini was certainly fond of, and obviously embraced. It really encompassed the values that he wanted Italian fascism to embrace, which was largely looking at the past, looking at ancient Rome, and looking at the Renaissance, and rephrasing it within a very modernist, industrial type of forward vision, which unfortunately still plagues cities like Rome, etc.